Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, France begins a 3-day relocation process on the Calais migrant camp. But where will the migrants go, and does the government have a fail-safe to ensure everyone has a place? And a mega media deal looms as American telecommunication company AT&T plans to buy Time Warner. What changes will it bring now that a mobile service provider is also providing content? And we begin our show in France, where the dismantling of a migrant camp known as the Calais jungle is now underway. Authorities have begun to relocate the 7,000 or so refugees from the camp, which lies in the northern town of Calais. The government says they will be moved to various parts of France to have their asylum request processed, but uncertainties, a lot of them, lie ahead.
Moving on or out. These migrants, many of whom have spent well over a year in this camp, are joining the queue to be registered. French authorities will bus them to other parts of the country, where they will find out if France has granted them asylum.
Tonight, 2,318 migrants are in shelters. A first step was made today. It happened quietly and under control, and we should, of course, continue.
Some conflict, though, was unavoidable. Some migrants resisted the relocation and clashed with police over the weekend. But most of them are glad to move out of these squalid conditions.
My plan is that we take admission in a university, that we apply for a university, that now we are going to study something about study in university, I think.
In France?
Yeah.
Now I think that I will start a new life, because in the jungle there is no life. It's no life.
Those who resist being relocated are trying to illegally get onto trains and trucks heading for the UK.
I'm gonna stay here, as I told you, unless arrested or forcibly driven to the accommodation centers.
Why?
Because I have a family in the UK.
Due to strict laws, the UK shuts out most migrants, unless they're unaccompanied minors with established family ties in the country. In recent days, 200 or so children have been accepted by Britain.
By clearing the camp, we can help secure the future of the juxtaposed controls, as well as playing our part to help those most in need in Calais.
French authorities will continue to process more people in the following days before moving in to destroy the camp. And that's when authorities fear clashes with those who refuse to leave will intensify. Whether transferred to elsewhere in France or to the UK, for many migrants, plenty of uncertainties remain on the road ahead.
Well, let's take a look at some of the latest situation of France's relocation of migrants from Calais camp to somewhere else in France. And I'm joined by Professor Tom Brooks from the UK. He's the head of the Durham Law School at Durham University. Professor Brooks, welcome to be with us. First of all, it's very important that we need to understand the point about why there has been previous cases in which dismantling of the camp have not been success legally. Help us to understand more about that.
Well, I think that the main problem has been that Britain and France have been blaming each other for the camp. So the British have said that the people who are in Calais are migrants on French soil and a French problem. The French have said, well, they are on our soil, but they're here because of a particular special arrangement. And that's the special arrangement by the Eurotunnel connecting France and Britain, where the two countries agreed that people would enter across the boundary on the other side of the tunnel. Right. So you would enter Britain on the French side of the Eurotunnel. And so you have migrants on that side who are there. So they blamed each other for this problem and have been unwilling to do anything about it until now.
Huge numbers of migrants have been applying for asylum, but approval number so far has been very low, far lower than expected. 2015, for example, EU countries offered asylum to nearly 300,000. In the same year, more than 1 million migrants applied for asylum, though it's not necessarily going to be approved or have been approved. Let's take into some consideration of these lengthy process. If you look at the numbers over there on the screen, you will have some idea. So, Professor, let me ask you, after this, Professor Brooks, dismantling of the camp, the people are being moved to other parts of France, but will that mean the end of this long battle against camps? Will these people necessarily, legally, going to be settled down for their better?
Well, I think that it's a real problem for any government to make determinations about asylum for people who don't usually have paperwork. A lot of the people we're talking about, not all, but quite a few, will not have all their paperwork, may not have their passports and so on. It can take a while to determine whether or not someone is who they say they are and leaving for certain reasons. Remember, just the fact that someone's in the camp doesn't mean that they have a reason to have asylum in the country. That asylum is something that has certain rules attached to it, and it can take some time to make a determination on this.
Right.
I think so. So there's a lot of work, and it can be quite a long delay to make determinations on whether or not anyone gets it or not.
Thank you very much, Professor Tom Brooks from Durham University. Thank you, really appreciate it. And now joining us for the discussion about the overall situation and where are these people heading for? Are they going to have a better future? We are having from Paris, Virginie Jouraudon. She is a research professor at the National Center for Scientific Research. In Berlin, we are having Joseph Yanning, senior fellow at the European Council for Foreign Relations. And finally, in London, Ian Beck, a professor research fellow at the European Institute at the London School of Economics, also associate fellow at Chatham House. Welcome to the three of you. First of all, is this really going to solve the problem, or rather going to create another camp somewhere else in Calais or some other towns in northern part of France? Let's go to Virginie.
Well, good afternoon. Well, this is the first time there's been such a big operation in Calais, but you are right to point out that one of the fundamental problems is the agreement between France and the UK, which means that actually the UK border is in France. We know that there are camps already in adjoining smaller cities, and we also know that there are unaccompanied minors, mostly from Afghanistan, who are basically sleeping around the train station in Paris, which gets you to Calais. So of course not everything will be all right. For instance, the Belgian authorities are afraid that some of the people will actually go to Belgium or try to get to even harbors in the Netherlands,
right,
not even Belgium. We won't solve the problem, but the problem actually now is still in the southern part of Europe, in places where the conditions are even more squalid, on the islands of Lesbos or in Italy, in the southern part of Italy.
Mr. Yanni, what do you think? Is this going to solve the problem, or another problem going to pop up somewhere later and sometimes later?
It could very well pop up at some other place, because, you know, the motivation is for these people stranded in Calais is to get to Britain. And that motivation doesn't end with the camp being dismantled. So you may expect that they will look for other ways to get to their target destination. In a way, it's also interesting to see that how the French respond to a problem, because France's own external borders are in the south of Italy, or in Greece for that matter, like all of the other Schengen countries. Here we see, on the issue of Calais, we see really the issue, as Virginie has been saying, we really see the issue that that Europe faces at its southern periphery at this point.
Ian, what do you think? I mean, we understand Scotland Yard police have been in Calais in order to relate with your French counterparts. But once again, is it going to solve the problem for the UK? 35 minutes under tunnel movement only needed before they transfer themselves from France to your country.
Well, it certainly won't solve the problem for the UK, because the migrants, as Joseph has just said, will continue to want to go to the UK. But we need to put this in a different perspective. The 10,000 or so would-be migrants in Calais are about 1% of just the Syrians now relocating into Europe. There's over 1 million Syrians displaced into Europe and a further 4 million in neighbouring countries. So dealing with 10,000 really has virtually no impact on the demand, which is coming for as many as 5 million just Syrians, and that's before you start counting the Afghanis, the Eritreans and the other nationalities. There's a big Europe-wide problem, and this is a tiny part of it.
Okay, but for now, what's next? Virginie, we understand the French authorities have been dispersed these people, transfer them to different kinds of camps for transition, and then they're going to be settled down into different towns, places in France. According to some media reports, we have already heard from residents from those places, likely these people are likely to be settled down. And they are suggesting, they are afraid that their little town in tranquility going to be disturbed as a result. Particularly the older generation, they don't know whether there's going to be safety and security guaranteed. Virginie, what do you make of it?
So just to pick up on what Ian said, by the way, most of the people, including most of the children, the unaccompanied minors, are actually not going to the UK. I think for about 500 have been identified by the French association in charge to go to the UK. The others, which about 700 of them, will actually go, as the rest of the 9,000, indeed to sort of well, they're called welcoming camps, welcoming centers, sorry. And then not everybody will go into an asylum request. For instance, the minors will be taken care of by departments who are in charge of protecting minors in need. It's called the social aid to children. The others, some of them may get a student visa. Not all of them are going to go into the asylum process. But to answer your question, there is a particular context. As you know, we will have presidential elections next year, followed by parliamentary elections. And already we have primary candidates from the right who are running on a very populist, anti-immigrant stance, including our former president, Nicolas Sarkozy. So the instrumentalization of this issue is actually mostly national. So it's, I know we talk a lot about this small, people from small villages who are worried. I think that it's a real issue in the sense that you cannot have 50 people arrive in a town that has 100 people. It has, but there's been much more solidarity than one can imagine at the local level, because you have mayors, even of small towns, who were willing to accept refugees. The question is, can these people, when they arrive in a small village in France, actually find a job?
Right.
They have no license. Some of them don't speak French. So even when you are solidaristic, the idea is still to see whether that will be the solution for these people, or whether they will think, I'm going back to Calais or wherever, and I'll still try to get to the UK.
Well, Joseph, I guess that is the question needs to be asked. So it's not just about the settlement, it's also about what's happening next to it. What's going to be their future? Do we have clear signs and signals about that?
I think,
let's go to Joseph.
We don't know really,
Sorry.
We don't know that really, Tian Wei. All societies receiving larger numbers of migrants can do is to try to prepare an environment that is conducive to integration. And I think a job is the pivotal issue there, but also being integrated in a social infrastructure, in neighborhood initiatives, in sports clubs, in all sorts of social activities that connect you with others in society. In Germany, we have this experience of being now in a position to, over a rather brief period of time, having to integrate and having to do this job for a rather large number of people. It's not easy, I can tell you that. It's not easy to get them into work. It's not easy to get them connected, but we have lots of encouraging signs from actually both larger cities and smaller cities. What you need, however, and that may be difficult in a small village, what you need, however, is sufficient job opportunities. Fortunately, in Germany at this point in time, there is plenty of availability of jobs, so it looks pretty good at this point.
Okay, for Germany, that is the way, but what about for France? Very briefly from you, Virginie, job opportunities, even for locals, easy to find. What about for these people?
France is not Germany, not just because it's not doing so well economically, but it's much more centralized. Our migrants are mostly in big cities, and job opportunities happen to be there. They don't go there by chance. One issue which has been solved in Germany is, and not in France, is the legal right to access the labor market when you are in an asylum procedure.
Right.
And that is really what we've been talking. I've been consulted by the president, people everywhere in the government, and I keep telling them these people need to have the right to work.
Okay.
This is the and this really has to change.
Well, all of these chaotic situations
exactly
are
the reasons my colleague said.
Yeah, the chaotic situation evolving, even though we're trying to find solutions. But Ian, does it make the UK a little bit farther away from the problem? What can be the UK's contribution? I know you are not inviting the problem, but on the other hand, there is a problem, so everybody probably have to do their share.
Well, the UK very slowly is accepting its responsibility for some of the children in the Calais camps, especially where they have relatives located in the UK. It's been a very slow process, and paradoxically the government is now coming under severe pressure for the slowness with which it's acted. So it's moving away from the discourse which said that Britain was hostile to migrants to one saying surely Britain can do this little bit to help vulnerable children who are exposed to all the dangers of the Calais camps. Now there's then the bigger question for the UK, that we have this big story around the referendum, Brexit, and the hostility overall to more people coming into the country, and that's a very long way from being solved.
Right.
So we really need to separate the short-term resolution of Calais from the longer-term difficulties of having a coherent migrant policy.
But the question, Ian, is will the current politics allow that to happen? Allow real discussions to happen? Allow real policies to come up despite all of these heated debate? As Virginie also earlier mentioned, for her country, for your country, that's the same.
It is, but I think you should be aware of the numbers once again, that in the last year, something of the order of 300,000 people came net into the UK. So that means the gross flow was nearly 500,000 people coming in. So we are used to accepting migrants in the UK. It's just that the sheer number coming in has created growing hostility to still more. I think we need to separate that from the relatively straightforward problem of dealing with the Calais camp.
So may I have the same question for you as well? Virginie, you talk about your political cycle, of course, for next year. Now the question really is, when you have a situation like this, is this going to strengthen the kind of rhetorics coming from the current administration? Does this mean they have already solved the problem? What would this mean for the all political debate next year for your election? And how, under that circumstances, will these people be treated? Will the policy be the same or likely to change it once again dramatically?
Well, there's a huge stake for the government this week. And it has to show that it can manage the evacuation of the camps. But this is not the end of it. Of course, they will come under scrutiny from both sides. I would say people more on the left who think that they're not doing enough, people on the right that say that they're going to be too lax. So we're going to have that debate. At the same time, they're basically waited until the end of the 5-year term of our president to really deal with the problem, which was probably not very smart. But the main issue is also how France was positioning themselves vis-à-vis the UK in renegotiating the agreement with the UK. But also France has to be much more proactive in the European context. But you know, even in an electoral context, you see among the right-wing candidates that they're not all aligning on this very, very populist anti-immigrant movement. But the National Front, the extreme right-wing party, is extremely strong in the northern area of France where Calais is located, actually. And they, of course, will be, I think, the winners of the fact that the government has, for 19 years, that camp has been there.
Right.
And, you know, for the last years with more people and they haven't done anything. So, you know, it's a question of both incompetence of the government that will be criticized, and of course it is really a very poor deindustrialized region in northern France where the National Front is doing extremely well.
Well, Joseph, the thing is this the beginning of the solution for European continent to deal with the migrants or asylum seekers, or many of them coming from Syria, Afghanistan, and some of the other countries in trouble, Somalia, for example, Sudan? Or this is just a political gesture? Remember Sangate, there's another camp back in the year 2002. 8 dissolved, but then came another camp like this. So is this the beginning of the solution, or just one of those pages you always see?
No, it's one of those paintings that you always see. If it was the beginning of the solution, then it would have to focus on the situation in Greece and in Italy. We would have to be, as Europe, become much more effective in receiving the people coming or reaching our soil, treating their claims, and then sending them on in the EU or sending them back home. We need to be much more forthcoming in terms of addressing the refugee issue at its sources or in the region. That is to massively engage in refugee camps in Turkey, in Lebanon, and in Jordan. And as we now started to also begin to become more sensitive to developments in sub-Saharan Africa in order to really address the issue. Everything else is a painting, is window dressing.
Window dressing, makeup only, Ian?
Yes, I agree with Joseph on that, because if you look at the sheer numbers trying to cross the Mediterranean, the number of would-be migrants drowning in the Mediterranean Sea is similar to the number being shipped out of Calais. So that tells you just how small a contribution to the resolution of the overall problem this is. As I said before, 10,000 in Calais, 1 million Syrians alone, so that's 100 times the scale just of the Calais, just comparing with Syrians, and that's before you start counting the other nationalities you mentioned. It's a huge problem, and it's not just Europe's problem, because the displaced persons is a global problem which the international community, including China, seems to be unable to cope with.
Well, this is a very long story. We are only in the very beginning of a few pages. We'll see how the story would evolve over the time, but thank you so much for the three of you. Give us a very frank insight about the story itself and possibly its future. Ian Beck, Joseph Yannin, Virginie Guy Hondong. I hope I pronounced your name right. Thank you so much for the three of you for being with us. Really appreciate it. Still to come in our program, it's a marriage of American giants as telecommunication company AT&T seeks to buy out Time Warner, owner of Warner Brothers. But is this union for the greater public good? That's a big question mark. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight on CCTV News. Our program comes to you Monday to Friday, every day on CCTV News. Just last weekend, the plan for this year's biggest merger was announced. American telecommunication conglomerate AT&T has announced plans to buy out Time Warner for a whopping $85.4 billion US dollars. Now, Time Warner owns the Warner Brothers Entertainment Company, as well as TV channels such as HBO and CNN. So, what will this mean for consumers and viewers around the world? And what will the future be of media look like? Before we go to our discussion, let's take a look at the details behind this potential deal.
AT&T and Time Warner are joining forces to deliver more programming in more ways to more consumers. The deal was announced over the weekend. At $85.4 billion, it's the biggest merger of 2016. AT&T's CEO Randall Stevenson said the goal is to address something customers don't like, paying for content once but not being able to access it on any device anywhere. Time Warner CEO Jeff Buick says the merger will accelerate distribution of its content to, quote, deliver our great brands and premium content to consumers.
This mountain kneel before me.
It will mean global hits like HBO's Game of Thrones and the Harry Potter films produced by Warner Brothers, all streamed directly to phones and tablets, delivering film and TV programs to customers on the go.
They're basically making a bet on television. At a time when everybody goes, television's dead. Well, maybe not. $85 billion worth of a bet would say it's not. It could be that we are thinking of television a little too narrowly, that it's maybe not something that hangs on your wall or sits on your shelf, but instead something that fits in your pocket.
U.S. regulators still have to sign off on the deal. These days, Washington seems to favor breaking up big companies instead of creating them. Both U.S. presidential campaigns have voiced opposition to the deal.
It's too much concentration of power in the hands of too few.
Really pro-competition and less concentration, I think, is generally helpful, especially in the media.
AT&T says it expects the deal to close by the end of 2017. And what media analysts are wondering now is whether the deal will hurt consumers as regulators begin asking how big is too big. Jessica Stone, CCTV, Washington.
To discuss more about this merger deal, or shall we say possible merger deal, we have in our Beijing studio Professor Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics. Welcome, Professor. In Washington, D.C., we have another professor, Professor Christopher Chambers, Professor of Journalism at Georgetown University. Welcome. In Los Angeles, we're joined by Mr. Eric Schiffer, who is the CEO of Patriarch Equity. Welcome as well. So, let's go to our two American guests first. What do you make of the deal? Should they be a deal? Should the relevant authorities let it go through? Let's go to Mr. Schiffer first, as a business person.
Well, it's interesting. I think that this is really somewhat of a diversion for AT&T. They have been bleeding and just getting devastated with subscriber numbers that are not to where they want them to be, and so this is an opportunity for them to redirect the focus, give them an opportunity to try to make a big deal. But the fact of the matter is, Time Warner had previously had distribution through its cable systems throughout the United States. They sold it off because they found that combining the two didn't make a lot of sense. I have not seen a case where adding distribution to content creates far more value for the company, and I think you're going to see it in this situation. Look, even if this deal happens, I think the potential of it happening is very unlikely, especially in the political environment that we're in today.
Professor Chambers, what do you make of it? Is it going to be the size of the merger that's the problem, or actually the kinds of businesses combined that's going to create some problem with the authorities?
I totally agree that, on the business side, there's not any example of this marriage of content to distribution actually working out, especially at this size with the history that both these companies have. At the same time, you have a situation where, again, politically, you have a huge populist movement, especially mobilized by Donald Trump, ironically, on the Republican side, where Republicans usually are in favor of deals like this. But you also have a situation where it's not making sense in this uncertain technological environment where, you know, are we just building an empire here, or are we really focusing on innovation and speed? And there's no proof that we're going to get innovation and speed, but just a bigger empire, just larger monsters to fight the other monsters like Apple and Google.
Well, Professor Chambers, what's wrong with having another empire? You've already got one, so why not have another? The business person would argue about that. And certainly, that would also create competition, they would say.
Well, I don't know how it would be pro-competitive. I mean, it's basically a chess game among these huge companies, and they're not, you know, nobody's really thinking about the consumer, or even, again, as we've heard now, it adds any value. It's basically a chess game against Apple, Google, Netflix, et cetera, et cetera. I don't see this helping. And frankly, again, innovation, we don't know if it's going to help innovation.
Okay.
We don't know if it's going to help, you know, AT&T, you know, it might even, you know, its debt load is going to be incredible now.
But you know, Mr. Schiffer, on the other hand, business people are not stupid. I mean, they try to do a deal for some reasons. So if you're saying this is not going to benefit this, not benefit that, it's only going to, in a way, compete against the other empires, what is the real motivation, do you think, behind this deal? I think that's the most important thing, isn't it?
Well, first of all, I can show you a lot of business people that are stupid. So I don't know that that necessarily equates. In this situation, they're hurting. I mean, they're losing subscribers, so they need something big. This is an opportunity for them to get something big. But I agree with your other guests. Where's the innovation that's going to come from this? If they want this kind of content, and frankly, it makes more sense for them to just license it. What really matters today in these networks is original innovation, original content. But in order to do that, you can do that in a far more economical way. I'm here from Hollywood today broadcasting. They have some of the best producers in the world. You can hire independent producers. You can bring in some of the best talent and create your own innovation. We've seen this with Amazon now, with Amazon Prime. We've seen it with Netflix, where they're investing in their own programming. They want to be competitive. If they really want an advantage, they should create their own content. They don't need to buy a gigantic entity like Time Warner that is already creating their own content, but they're licensing it out to people.
Well,
so where's the exclusivity?
I'm sure both of the board of the two companies should talk to both of you, gentlemen, I have to say, for some advice. But having said that, though, let me come back to you, Professor Liu. I mean, if you look at these two companies, AT&T and also Time Warner, both of them are supposed to be regarded as quote-unquote traditional companies. They're not necessarily so-called new tech companies like Google, like Netflix. But the thing is, they also want to change, it seems. They want to make a difference. They want to have a new life. The question is whether that is the way to have a new life. Will they survive this new life? Is this new life going to be liked by most of the others in the population? I think those are the crucial questions to be asked. Are they going to have a new life with this?
I think they are very much determined to really have a new life in a way that because AT&T, Telegram doesn't really work anymore, so it should be AT now, and now they have to acquire a new business to fill the gap, and they do not want the name to really disappear.
Yeah.
And also there are higher leverage supporters, JP Morgan and Citibank, etc. They are involved. So why don't we do the deal? So AT&T is still a strong brand, and also by having the content getting allied with the distribution, it also makes some sense from my perspective.
AT&T, by the way, the other two gentlemen coming from the U.S. is not alone when you are talking about traditional companies try to acquire into the new market, for example, about content. In China, we also have some. AT&T is not, as we said, the only business giant eyeing for entertainment industry and TV industry. Chinese real estate, Mongol. Wang Jianlin, for example, already acquired 2 Hollywood companies, Legendary Pictures and also Dick Clark Productions, with over $4 billion US, and he's eyeing on more Hollywood companies. Plus, Chinese internet retail giant, of course, Jack Ma, you also know that, Alibaba, has gone hand in hand with Amblin Partners, whose chairman is famous Hollywood director Steven Spielberg. So whether it's traditional or new companies, so-called new industry companies, they're all looking at content and possibly TV, movie productions for a better future. So why can't we give AT&T an opportunity, Mr. Schiffer? Are you having prejudice against traditional companies?
No, there's not prejudice. I mean, we're looking at this purely from a business standpoint, and I understand the rationale for certain Chinese investors to look at bringing and buying certain content producers, per se, and obviously being able to perhaps have exclusivity to the market in China and being able to distribute. Now, that's an argument that makes sense because there would be an exclusive element involved. In this case with AT&T, there's no exclusivity. They're already, Time Warner, already licensing across the board. So there's a possibility they may get some original content, but it's unlikely. And to me, they're really doing it, like we said, and to try to create a diversion, to try to find some type of perceived value. But I don't agree with your guest there in Beijing. I don't think that adding distribution to content has ever shown to add more cumulative value other than 1 + 1. And certainly Time Warner's the perfect example of this. They divested of their distribution. They got rid of it because it didn't make sense.
What about you, Professor Chambers? I mean, you're a professor of journalism. Of course, you come in from the content's perspective. Are we going to have more competitive markets in terms of producing content? Are the users now of those content providers going to benefit as a result? Are we going to have more new players coming out, bringing us new surprises for the consumers?
Oh, I think we are, and in the United States and in China, I mean, you're seeing that every day. The question is, would a monster like this stifle that or bring it about at faster speeds, with more bandwidth? And the answer probably is no. The innovation in content is taking place, outside of these mega mergers. And, with Time Warner, you have HBO, you have CNN, you even have DC Comics. Time Warner owns Batman and Superman, but Time Warner is already licensing them out. And I don't think the American consumer is going to want to be limited to an AT&T phone to see Batman. Other consumers want to see Batman and Superman, not just through AT&T. So, I mean, that's what's going on here, and that's where the innovation on the smaller level is happening. Now, another issue, of course, is whether Uncle Sam, our government, is going to let this happen at all. And if our Federal Communications Commission can find just a little tiny door to get jurisdiction, their standard for wiping out a merger is much lower than our Justice Department. And a lot of consumer groups are lobbying the FCC, and now you have Donald Trump and probably Hillary Clinton out there opposing this too. I don't know on that level if this is even going to happen.
So, Professor Liu, having heard from the other 2 guests from the U.S., the question is, what's going to be the solution for these traditional, quote-unquote, the companies? Of course, this deal, as illustrated by both of them and many others, may not be a very smart one. And having said that, though, people are trying to look for new opportunities. The question has always remained, what is that new opportunity and solution?
Well, of course, the technology really is really getting revolutionary in the media and entertainment industry. And now, from the analog system to the digital system, now you have the VR and AR, etc. So I think, with humongous money, they really are there to invest in new technologies. And the other way is really integration. Of course, I do share a portion of the 2 previous guests about the idea, but in the meanwhile, AT&T people and Time Warner people, they are not really, thinking beyond the rim, because there are a lot of rational people, and also there are bankers behind it. So by vertical integration, that's something also a way of growth.
Okay.
Yeah, and for China, I think given Wang Jianling's the financial might, and also his also distribution network in the Wanda Plaza all along, not only in China, but in the western part of the world. So I think that's also a similar integration.
The question is, where does the innovation come from? Both of you said, gentlemen, Professor Chambers and Mr. Schiffer, it does not come from this mega deal. Where does it come from? We understand that in China, for example, this round of bubble of internet companies had burst to a certain extent. So people are looking for what's the next opportunity, and where are we going to see a primary example of the next opportunities, generation of next opportunities. Professor Chambers, shed some light for us.
Well, you're seeing it again. I mean, it's not. Some of them are occurring in people's living rooms. That's that small, and incubators like that. But mostly they're medium-sized companies that are capitalized by smaller investors, and they're enabled by changes in technology. And we've seen that even with the birth of broadband has exploded this. The old world, basically. The old world was AT&T and telephones and telegraphs. But we're seeing it even here. The government has enabled cable companies to be separated from their tabletop, their television boxes. So companies are now making content to go straight to consumers and bypassing the cable companies here. So they're not tiny companies, but some of them are. But they're medium-sized, and they're feeding into this pipeline. Let's just say, and some of them can be obtained by bigger corporations.
Okay.
But I think the smart ones are sitting back and letting this happen.
Mr. Schiffer, we only have 20 seconds left, if you can.
Sure. Well, I tell my clients from an investment standpoint, I tell them to certainly look at the areas of artificial intelligence. I think it's huge. I think we're in the infancy stages. There are going to be very big opportunities there. I also tell my clients to look at virtual reality, another area. Both areas are, again, at the early stages with big upside.
Eric Schiffer, Christopher Chambers, Liu Baocheng, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us, or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.